Hello, everybody. Good morning and welcome to Elevenses or 1107s, as it happens to be today. But that, of course, is because the number seven is sacred to us here at World Builders. And sevens is just way too early. We are having our special broadcast all this week during our Geeks Doing Good fundraiser, which you can find at igg.me/at GDG/2021. There we go. Yep, there it is. And I'd like to acknowledge our geek in the van, who is not seen, which is Jamie, and our producer online, who will be putting in links. Jason, it's amazing if you just mention something. There's a producer who will look it up on the web and make it appear in the chat. And of course, our wonderful guest, Jason Sanford, writer, well, I should say author. Is it short stories are writers and books are authors? Is that how that works? Or
I use the term interchangeably. I think most people do. So you can definitely short story writers are authors too.
Gotcha. You have a column you wrote. You've been an editor. You've been an archaeologist. I guess I guess I think of you kind of as a Renaissance man here. And I don't know where you're located. I know you used to be in the south of the U.S. Are you still there? Or?
No, I live in the Midwest, American Midwest.
So, well, hello, neighbor.
Ohio. I'm in Ohio.
I gotcha. I guess I could always read the actual.
Oh no, it's
thing.
Good.
Here, but I will say that you've published your short stories in the British magazine Interzone and Asimov Science Fiction, Analog Science Fiction, Fact Beneath Ceaseless Skies, Fireside, Intergalactic Medicine Show, Tales of the Unanticipated. Didn't see that one coming. And lots of multiple years best story collections. Including my Kindle, where I recently read his story Mirror Blink, which you can find on Kindle, and I'm in the middle of reading the one that was nominated for a Nebula, Blood Grains Speak Through Memories. And so I'm gonna throw this out here, and it's kind of funny. I'm gonna kind of call you out here because you wrote a while back a big column that sort of lambasted the whole MFA tendency towards micro fictions and short fictions. And one of the criticisms you wrote in that is that it makes it difficult to microfiction. You can't really find a voice. You can't really, it doesn't give you enough time to develop a voice and that kind of pacing and stuff like that. But you, although we'll talk about your book in a moment, but you write mainly short stories. And I will tell you, having now read 1 point something of your short stories, you had a voice in a very short time and you had an immersive world there. I mean, the blood grains speak through sands. I'm wanting to sketch out wagons, and I can immediately picture what an anchor looks like, at least some of them, and things like that. So
I should put out there that essay about microfiction is really in flash fiction was talking about really short stories of a few hundred words. But I'm gonna throw this out there. I wrote that 20 plus years ago.
Yeah.
So my views have changed.
Oh, really? Okay.
Good. I will say at the time when I wrote that, I was basically, saying that I was not a fan of flash fiction and microfiction, which again is very short stories. I don't write any of that. I'm not good at it. My short fiction tends to be full short story length, which, thousands of words. But honestly, that essay I wrote, it got a lot of attention back there, but it's one of those you're young and precocious and you're like, I have opinions. And, sometimes you later look back and go, yeah, you had opinions. Good job, Jason. But
well, I mean,
I'll be honest, that essay, it's one of those, hey, it is what it is. You wrote it back then, but I did have some strong views about MFAs. And I still kind of feel some ways that I'm not a fan of people who think, if you want an MFA, go get it. Hey, it can give you a lot of time to do your writing. But I'm not, you don't have to have an MFA to be a writer. I don't have one. A lot of my favorite writers don't have them. So there's, don't believe that you have to go and get the MFA to become an author, to become a writer. So that was kind of what I was trying to say back then, but I probably was a little more antagonistic.
I mean, you were definitely fire and brimstone. And I didn't mean to call you out on it in terms of, hey, this thing you wrote 20 years ago, I'm going to call you to task for this.
It's all good.
I actually, it's kind of funny because I both agreed with you about the MFAs. I actually have a degree in dance. So performing arts MFAs, I am very aware of how much of a waste of time they can be. It's like, just get out there and dance already.
And it's not, again, it's nothing if some people find it's a great path and some people don't, and it's just, I didn't want people, when I wrote it back then, to think this is the only way to be a writer.
Right, exactly. And I'd say that the whole lead up to the question was actually more along the lines of, and this is a mistake that I made for many years until I started doing my own writing. I was under the impression that writing short stories was easier than writing novels. And I so do not, having tried to write both now, I am so much more comfortable in a novel where you have room to just blah and make mistakes and write yourself out of corners. Would you agree that writing short stories is its own special particular art?
I think it depends on everybody. Every writer finds different aspects of that difficult or less difficult. I personally find novel writing to be more difficult. I think my forte is a short fiction writer. Although I do have a novel coming out in September, which I'm very proud of and happy with. But some people, I think some writers can really crank out the short fiction, and some people can do the long fiction. It's different, different skill sets and different things that succeed. That said, I do think one reason that short fiction can be difficult is you don't have the room for mistakes and extraneous stuff. If you have a novel that you're writing and you want to have a digression and go into, hey, I want to follow this character, this really isn't overly tied in with the plot. I want to go for a few pages on this other character or setting or this digression. You can get away with that in a novel as long as the voice and the overall story is still compelling. If you try that stuff with short fiction, it doesn't work because you just don't have the space for that. So it's a lot more, short fiction can be a lot more focused and to the point. That's one reason I love it so much, is that, it's, I think it's the most powerful way to write fiction, but that's just my opinion. Doesn't mean it's the right or wrong one, but that's one reason I do love it.
How long have you been writing? When did you start writing short fiction?
Oh, long time. I mean, I've probably, I guess, 20 years or so, that I've been really, but I was doing fiction before then, but then, now when I go back and look at it, I'm like, oh, wow, ouch. I first started to get professionally published in science fiction magazines, I think 2008 or 2009. I had my big break really with the British magazine Interzone. They published, I think, 13 of my stories in just a short span of years. I won their readers poll three times. So, that story you mentioned, Mirror Blink, was originally published in Interzone. So that really kickstarted my career in the genre. But I did write, I was writing stories and fiction before all that, and have the trunk novels and trunk stories that just are never going to come out again. And, that's part of how you work it as a writer, is you just keep writing. And even though, some things won't work out.
In 50 years, it'll be the collected works of Jason Sanford, and they'll just,
we
will
nuke them before then.
Instructions in your will, yes. Now I haven't read all of your work, but the ones that I was reading, including the short that you just recently posted on your blog, which I would recommend everyone go and not right now, but after this, if you'd like a taste of Jason's writing, go to jasonsanford.com. And in his blog, he actually put in a recent story that I believe you narrated on a podcast.
I did narrate
Yeah.
it. It was a story, and that's a good. I I've reached a lot. I still have stories that don't get accepted, and this was a story I wrote for an anthology. Didn't work out. Doesn't mean it was a bad story, but it just wasn't a fit for the anthology. Tried a few places submitting it, didn't quite click. And so I said, you know what, I'll narrate it on this podcast and just post it on my website. It's a short little story, very short for me. I usually write longer short fiction, talking about 5,000, 6,000 or more words. I think this one was 2,000 words. So that's one of my shorter pieces I've written. And I liked it, it's trying to make a point about, some bad things that torture does to society and all that. So.
Oh yeah, the name of the story for those who might not have clicked on the link yet is "The Wheels on the Torture Bus Go Round and Round."
Yeah, obviously playing off that famous Kids song.
Yes,
but just showing how, it's not explicit. There's no torture shown in the story or anything, but just showing how, when a society allows wrong things like torture to happen, or it impacts everyone, including young people, and that's just, so.
Interestingly, one of the, I mean, and it just, I won't go into this a lot deep because I don't want to spoil the story for people. But when I was looking at it, I kept thinking about social media and the way our lives are, the way an essay that you wrote 20 years ago can be brought up and thrown in your face, in the middle of an interview.
Oh, yeah.
So, but again, it's really enjoyable. And
Thank you.
The way in your Wikipedia entry, speaking of having things thrown at you, I believe the phrase was weird SF or
Yes.
the genre that you tend to go with there is something along the lines of weird. Can you describe how you would, like, if somebody said, "Oh, what kind of science fiction do you write?" How would you answer that?
It's again, back in the day, I think some people were asking, I kind of was saying, described it as sci-fi strange, it's kind of a weird science fiction. I know some critics have called said it a lot similar wording, if maybe a little different. It's I do write some fantasy and a little bit of horror. Actually, funny, ironically, I have a story that's going to be in the year's best horror from Ellen Datlow later this year. But I mainly the stories I write are science fiction, meaning they're grounded in possible future realities, based on what we know of the world. But I do tend to go to the weird on the stuff. You know what I mean? So, and sometimes I like to tell people, yeah, I write science fiction, but it often reads more like fantasy. My novel that's coming out later this year, Plague Birds, is very much like that. So it's set in the far future, where a lot of you can see it in today's world. A lot of our technology, if I ask you to explain, okay, so how does the entire explain to me real quick how your cell phone works. I mean, you may have a general knowledge of it, but you or I would probably have trouble recreating a cell phone and making it work. So to a lot of people, technology is becoming where you don't really question it. It's there, it's an advanced technology, but you kind of just accept it. That's the way the world is. And that's a lot of my stories are very much like that. They have advanced technologies. I'm not going to go into pages of explanation on how they work, but I'm more interested in how does that technology change us as people? How does it impact us as a society? And that's where a lot of my stories dig into. But then I also have some, I was a Nebula finalist this year for a story, The 8,000ers, that's about a vampire on Mount Everest. So hey.
Yeah. Well, that's a good character story. I can just see the pitch meeting. It's vampires, but on Mount Everest.
Yes, exactly.
Is that how the ideas come to you, by the way? Is that, because one of the things it seems like you're really a prolific writer.
I personally, well, thank you. I appreciate that. I wouldn't call myself prolific. I think I actually write very slow.
Okay.
I tend to get an idea of a story in my mind. I start writing on it and it goes from there. That 8,000ers, the vampire on Mount Everest. It was actually a sequel to another short story that came out a few years ago with the same character, the vampire in it. Um, and I was just thinking, well, she lives a long time. And I started thinking about I'd like to have her interacting with some very entitled tech bros on Mount Everest and basically see where that goes. And I liked where it went, so I kind of ran with it. But I didn't sit down and say, vampire on Mount Everest, let me write that story. That's not how I tend to do it. But other people write differently. So.
Gotcha. So let's talk about the Nebulas for a bit. That's actually how you and I first met, was through your work with the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Association. And the Nebulas came up, and you were nominated again.
Yep.
And I mean, is it a crushing disappointment, or at this point is it well, I'll just do the next one, or how does?
No. I mean, it is. I got to be honest. This year, I was very happy. John Wiswell, who won. We were up for finalists in the short story category for the Nebula. His story is amazing. He's a great person, so I was very happy for him. I wished I could give him a big. It was all virtual this year, unfortunately, but I wish I could have been there to give him a big hug. I mean, it is what it is. So you write the stories, and you never know how the reaction to them will be. Sometimes I've had a story where I was like, wow, this story is good. People are going to go crazy for this. And, it kind of, barely got a ripple. But then another story, it's like, wow, that one just, people loved it. So you never know how the reaction is. You can just write the stories, make them the best you can. It's, if I get caught up on the reception, it can do things to your creative process. I don't want to go there.
It sounds very similar to developing a Geeks Doing Good fundraiser, he said with a non-obvious segue.
Yes.
Which is part of why we are here. We appreciate your taking the time and your support of World Builders during this time. We are definitely putting up as many different books and things like that as we can. And when we are putting up one of the things that we have up is the debut author bundle. So we have books by Nandi Taylor, S.B. Divya, and Nevo in unsigned versions, and we have Sean Speakman and C.R. Saxon as well in signed copies. All of these are people who we've had on World Builders before, which is really an honor to have. And the question I always ask people, I'm going to ask you this, is what is it you wish you'd known before you did your novel? Or did the fact that you'd done so many short stories beforehand kind of prepare you for it? No? Okay. So what do you wish you'd known beforehand?
Well, I mean, one thing I wish I'd known, and this is in general for my writing too, I'll share this, is that it's okay to tell the stories as I tell them. I'm very, my mind works in a unique way. And so I've always, struggled with trying to share the stories as I see them with the world. And I thought sometimes that my stories, I shouldn't, how I see them isn't how the world wants to see them. So I should tell the stories that other people expect me to tell, if that makes any sense. It took me a while to understand that I can write the story I want to write, and it's okay. So and with the novel, that was kind of initially when the first draft, it was more, hey, I'm trying to write this how I think others would want it. But then I realized, no. So I ended up doing a massive rewrite to it. Total, one of those, you're like, man, this, I wish I'd done this to start with, this path. And where it eventually came to, I'm very happy. I'm very pleased, but it was a much longer process than I thought. Now, but that's okay. In some ways, how I write is I like the path. I like the process, where it goes. So sometimes it just, maybe I should have planned it out more, is what I'm saying.
So does that mean you're a pantser or a plotter?
More pantser, but I do have the plotting ability to know where I'm trying to go, but that doesn't mean I'll always go there. It's like I have a destination in mind, but that doesn't mean along the way I might not change to a different destination or take a sightseeing trip somewhere else. But I do have ultimate destinations in mind, but I don't plot to the nth degree on any of my stories. Now, that said, I am working on some stuff where I'm trying, more heavily plotting, but even then I like to, when I plot stuff out, I do like to leave a lot of open space to explore, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm. Well, that also, I mean, like you just mentioned that the vampire was a sequel to an original story, and I know there's a sequel to Blood Grains Speak Through
Two
Blood
sequels.
Grains Speak Through Memories. Yeah.
I'm actually working on the third one. I mean, I'm wrapping up the series.
Okay, so is that another reason to leave that opening for you so that you can like maybe give further exploration?
Oh, absolutely. But also, I mean, that said, um, I like the exploration of writing fiction. Where is it taking me? And if I'm happy where I'm being, shown this new place, showing some exploring new ground in my mind and everything, then perhaps the readers will enjoy it too. Um, but yeah, no, I do have, like I said, with that Blood Grains, I am working on the final novella to tie up all the stories. But I did have an ultimate destination in mind, but I didn't plot every story out to the nth degree, is what I'm basically saying. So, but again, that's my process. Others, trust me, everybody has a different one.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm tempted because I'm a big fan of reading about other people's morning routines to ask about your writing, your methodology for writing. But before we decide if we want to cover that or not, we got a technical note from our geek in the van. If it's possible to either move your mic closer or sit closer to the mic or just talk a little bit louder, the levels are just a little bit lower. It's not like we haven't heard what you've been saying, but it would
Okay, no, I
balance it out
understand.
a little
Is
bit.
this better?
Yes, I believe so. Let's
Okay,
wait and see yep, she
I
said
was
yes.
leaning back in the seat.
We got the virtual thumbs up. That's that in case you're wondering, the geek in the van, that's one of the tropes that we talk about, is how in every caper there's the geek in the van who's talking in your ears and is kind of doing all the technological stuff, and is usually a side character. But I think that would be an interesting novel to write, would be
Oh, absolutely.
the perspective of the geek in the van who has to deal with the people outside doing all changing the plans all the time.
Oh, yeah.
So one of the things, I mean, when I say prolific writer, it's not just the stories. You also have a Patreon, which actually we'll have to make sure we put a link to your Patreon in the chat. But you also, you have the genre. What I don't have the second name here.
Oh, my genre grapevine column.
Genre grapevine. That's what I was thinking. Yes.
Yes.
And anybody who can write a column on a consistent basis and put that together in a way that makes people go, I can't wait for your next column. that is something.
I appreciate that.
So what brings you to the need to both be a commentator and a sort of a citizen? I don't know, I guess I wouldn't say citizen journalist, both a journalist and a creator on there.
Right. I've worked, my first jobs was in the newspaper industry. I've worked as a journalist, as an editor at newspapers. I've and then I have a history in the media industry. So I really enjoy journalism, and when I see, but I also love the science fiction fantasy genre greatly, and so part of that is when I see stuff, I'm like, that's interesting. I want to write something, kind of explore that in a journalistic point of view. So my column gives me the ability to do that. And I really do enjoy it, so I think there is a need for good journalism in all aspects of life, especially in science fiction and fantasy genres. So I try to do that. My column, I'm glad people like it. And like right now, so I'll go home and, after a day at work, and I'll be like, ooh, now we get to do some journalism into science fiction and fantasy. And it's exciting. I love it. I think you're muted.
I am. How embarrassing. I'm not even wearing the right t-shirt. Does that include when there's not necessarily the good news? I mean, we we talked
Yeah.
beforehand that there's some recent news from the Hugo committee.
Yeah.
Do you want to give people a broad outline of that?
I mean, right now, in the last 6 months, we've had, or just to back up a little bit, sorry, the Hugo Awards are run by WorldCon, by each that year's WorldCon. In this case, it's DISCON, which will be located in Washington, D.C. And then so that WorldCon, that year's WorldCon, DISCON this year, runs the Hugos for that year. So in the last 6 months, we've now had two groups of the Hugo Award staff, the admins who run the Hugos, quit, basically step aside, because before earlier this year, at the start of the year, it was some conflicts on where, about what could be done with the Hugos, and some controversy over how many finalists could be named and all that kind of stuff, by way of pointing out it's not so much in like the fiction categories where you usually have just one or two authors up for a particular story or novel, but in some of the other categories like editor, semi-prozine and stuff like that, you may have a number of people who work on that. Like, for example, Strange Horizons has a large number of editors and staff, volunteers who work on it. So Strange Horizons wants to make sure that all those people are recognized. Some of the At the start of the year, some of the more WorldCon people were like, no, we need to limit it. You can only recognize up to 4 people. So that was a controversy. That and some other issues. The Hugo Awards admin staff said, you know what, we're all quitting, stepping aside. Well, we just had it happen again yesterday. The replacement staff, that sounded bad, I don't mean replacement staff, but the new Hugo admin staff. And one thing you need to know is the Hugo Awards and WorldCon are essentially run by volunteers who do, who really step up and put a lot of their time and effort in that. So for them to say, you know what, we appreciate the work we've done, but we're going to step aside, it's kind of like, wow, that's it's a little bit, what all's going on there. Now I'm still digging into what all happened this time again, although it is related to the earlier issues of, how many people get recognized and all that. So sometimes when I write about stuff like that, it is, I don't want to bring a hammer down or cause someone trouble, but it's also, I think it's very important for people in the genre to know what goes on in the genre. There's this whole thing about, the missing stair. Y'all, have you heard of that before?
Yeah.
Where people in a certain situation or culture or subculture or anything like that, or organization, everyone will know that, hey, on that stairwell, there's a missing stair. i.e. there's someone who causes trouble or there's a problem. We all know about it, but then no one else does. So the people who know about it know not to step there where they'd fall through and hurt themselves, but everyone else doesn't know. So I'm not a fan of that. I think, people knowledge needs to be shared on this stuff so that, people don't get hurt. People don't get harassed. People, so that's one reason I write the column. Doesn't mean I would love to be able to write a genre column that was 100% happy news, but unfortunately that's not life. That's not how everything goes. And people, I think they need to know some of the stuff that happens, because it impacts them, both as fans or writers or, editors or publishers, everyone, it impacts us.
Yeah, it's it's interesting. I long before I had this gig, I had friends who were involved in a lot of different cons, including in the development of WisCon here. And one of the things is that WisCon developed because other conventions had too many missing stairs. And so WisCon was trying to be a more accountable and oriented situation. And yeah, it's interesting to hear that particular, I haven't heard that phrase in a while.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's an excellent term to use.
Right.
And it's hard sometimes, I think, and this may be a whole rabbit hole we don't want to even get into, so we may just acknowledge this and then turn away from it and talk about something lighter. But it is the difficulty of having someone whose work you either enjoyed or was pivotal in your life or gave you hope in a dark time. And then you find out later on that their personal or views or things like that are different. And
Sure.
I mean, I think the easiest example right now, I think, would be the Harry Potter series.
Yeah.
Which, and it's, yeah, I don't know, I'm not going to put you on the spot and say, how do we solve that? But I think it's interesting to have to figure out the decision between at what point you separate the person from the product.
Well, I mean, so I think that's a very personal thing for people. I mean, um, there are authors and stories that were highly influential for me when I was growing up, who I've now learned some very disturbing things about, that doesn't change how influential those stories were for me when I was younger. But, it may mean I don't recommend their work to others, or, or it may mean that I evaluate the work in a different light. So I mean, that's each person's going to have their own personal response to that, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, this idea, I don't think, sometimes when people say you should separate the work from the author, it's almost like they use that as an excuse to overlook anything wrong that the author has done, which I don't agree with that.
Right.
But then again, an author is not their work. The stories I write are not, me, but they also come from me, and they're influenced by my life. So I mean, it's a complicated thing. I don't have a simple answer, but I think everybody's got to make their own decision on that, and that's.
I mean, it's a mixed blessing that now on TV I can stream all of the old Muppet shows, some of which are wonderful and delightful, and some of which I'm like, oh, that did not.
Oh yeah,
did not age well at all.
No. Yeah. I know. I've seen that. Yeah, no, exactly. But that there's nothing wrong with that, and and it gets back into this idea that I often hear in the genre, like, people who talk about, well, if you want to be a true science fiction and fantasy fan, you must read these authors. And they then proceed to name authors who were maybe part of the big three 50 years ago, or maybe they were, and I'm like going, there's nothing wrong with reading those authors, but you don't have to read them to be a science fiction fantasy fan these days. There's so many different paths to the genre these days, so many different books and stories and films and video games and stuff. The genre changes, life changes, nothing is static. So this idea, I think sometimes when I hear people like, well, you need to separate the work from the author, or it's not fair, this is cancel culture, and all that kind of stuff. When I hear that, I think, what are you really trying to say? You don't want anything to ever change? Because that sometimes is what I think people are saying when they say that. Obviously not everyone, but sometimes, yeah, things change. That's life. And, there's, to be quite blunt, if life didn't change, it would be a pretty bad place. We exist and live because life is constantly changing. So things will never be the same as they used to be, and doesn't mean we can't appreciate what went before, but it also means we can fully critique things that went before, and there's nothing wrong with that, and say, you know what, that aspect of it, we don't want to go again. I mean, to be quite blunt, Isaac Asimov, one of the most influential science fiction writers of all time. Nothing will change the fact that he is one of the most influential science fiction writers of all time. But has since come out, oh my God, he was a serial harasser of women. I mean, he would go to conventions and just pinch women on the butts all the time. And this is well documented. This was documented at the time. Everybody knew about it. But now people are like, well, you shouldn't, he's gone. You shouldn't be critiqued. You know what? No, we can fully critique.
Definitely critique, yeah.
Come on, we're humans. We critique everything. And that's one of our strengths as a species. So yeah, it's complicated.
It also goes both ways in terms of, I recently saw a commentary where someone said, if I ask you who your favorite writers are and you name a bunch of people who haven't written anything in years, like Asimov and Heinlein, and then they name Mercedes Lackey, and I'm like, Mercedes Lackey just had a book come out last week.
Well, yeah,
I
yeah.
mean,
Mercedes,
you know, there's a difference between,
yeah,
you know, a person who was influential and is, you know, now gone, and a person who was influential and, hey, is still producing new stuff and new genres, new areas.
absolutely, absolutely. And
Yeah.
I mean, you know, there's nothing wrong with loving old science fiction or fantasy or anything. You know, I mean, I I still go back to some of the books I read when I was young. My grandfather had a big science fiction fantasy collection, so I grew up on, in many ways, on the golden age of science fiction and fantasy.
What
And
are your favorites? Like what are some of them you
Arthur
like?
C. Clarke, I loved Arthur C.
Hmm.
Clarke, which is another. I've since learned some things about Arthur C. Clarke. I'm like going, oh, come on, Clarke, you know. But that doesn't change how influential some of those books were to me. Um, you know, and there's nothing wrong with that. Um, you know, so, but yeah, but I think part of it though, if you really want to know where, you know, we are also living through a new golden age for the science fiction fantasy genre.
Mhm.
Um, you know, there's some amazing works. Oh my goodness.
Exhibit A, N.K. Jemisin. I mean,
Well,
you
oh,
know,
exactly. I mean,
yeah,
3 Hugo Awards for best novel in a
in a
row.
row. I know.
I
It's
mean, never been done before. And the
mhm.
books are amazing, amazing. You know, so I mean, you know, and then you know, there's so many other great writers out there right now. You know, so you know, if you don't want to read current authors that are currently creating some genre works, that's fine. You don't have to. No one's putting the gun to your head and saying you must read this. But then also, you know, you need to understand that you may not be as in touch with the genre as it currently exists. You know, one of my frustrations is science fiction and fantasy genre is in some ways the biggest thing genre in the world right now. I mean, you look at the not just book sales, but movies, video games, all the top works, are essentially in the world right now and different are essentially science fiction versions of science fiction and fantasy, and I'm being expansive there. I'm including like, the Marvel comic movies and all that, the Marvel movies, all that, which are essentially science fiction and fantasy. But people are very receptive to the genre. So that's why I get frustrated when I see gatekeeping on the literary aspect of the genre, because it's like people love this stuff all over the world. And you're trying to gatekeep on who should be what is proper science fiction fantasy or who is a true fan, and I'm like, really? That's the way to kill the written genre. Be expansive, open, be as open as you can, and you'll find some amazing stuff.
Yeah, it's it the we looking at the chat. There's definitely resonating with people.
Oh,
Um, yeah, Karimshot says he tends to bounce off stuff using older work as a reference without engaging with it.
mhm.
Yeah, and that is, I'll be honest, I have never read anything by H.P. Lovecraft, but I feel like I know enough about the mythos to be able to reference it and enjoy the derivative works, which I think probably are better. I loved Lovecraft Country. I thought it
Oh
was
yeah.
wonderful and
Oh
wonderfully
yeah, and
enjoyable.
that's it. That's exactly the point I'm making is you don't have to go back and have read the original Lovecraft stories, which I've read some of them. Some of them are okay. Let's be honest, Lovecraft was not the best writer. He had ideas, but was not a great stylistic writer. But even then, some of his ideas he put in there are like, oh, dang, are you really? But the reason Lovecraft is so big these days is because what new authors that followed him did with the Lovecraftian mythos, with the world and universe and view that he created. And honestly, some of the writers who are really doing amazing stuff with Lovecraft type fiction these days, Lovecraft would have been like, oh hell no. I mean,
Yeah,
because let's be honest. I mean, he is very blunt. He was a big racist and a hater and many other things,
yeah,
anti-Semite and all that. So some of the people writing great Lovecraftian works these days, I like to think they would have probably given him a heart attack.
oh yeah, and
Honest.
I hope so. Yeah,
But that you don't have to have read the original Lovecraft stories to enjoy these new stories being written, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong if you want to go back and read them with the understanding that, wow, some of them are going to be kind of shocking and disturbing based on who he was.
yeah.
But Yeah.
Well, and Jules the Swan brings up Disney himself was super problematic, you know.
Oh, exactly. I mean, and there's, you know, you know, you don't want literature to ever be static. Never,
Mhm.
ever be static. You know what I'm saying? So, and that's a good thing because who wants to read, the same thing that I don't know your grandparents read, and
I mean, I
the
stepped
world
away
changed.
from epic fantasy for many years because I felt like it wasn't anything new that I was reading. It's like, oh look, it's another hero's journey with the chosen one, and I could plot out the beats. I just stopped reading
Yeah,
them, and it took a while to get back into it, which is ironic given my current career path.
yeah.
Um, would you say you mentioned Arthur C. Clarke? Would you say that there are other people who you would think of as having influenced you, or who
Mhm.
or the other way you can take this question is, who is somebody that you wish more people knew about?
Oh yeah. I mean, there are others. I mean, I like I say, I grew up on a lot of the classic science fiction works. So Isaac Asimov's, and so when I'm critiquing Isaac Asimov's, trust me, I mean, I loved Asimov's works growing up. I loved Clarke's works growing up.
Hey,
Um,
I'm a recovering Heinlein fan, so I feel your pain there.
yeah, and Le Guin, many others. Uh, Harlan Ellison is another. In fact, I guess you could say I loved a lot of fiction by
Mhm.
authors who, if I'd met them in person, probably would not have liked them. I mean, I
Yeah,
really was influenced by Harlan Ellison's short fiction. But let's be honest, Harlan Ellison was an asshole.
he
Can
was
I
a
say
jerk.
that on this? I hope I can.
Oh yes, you can
Uh,
fucking say anything you want. Yeah.
and I will point this out, just to lay it out there. Um, Harlan Ellison was very litigious. So over the years, once I started becoming a science fiction writer, and I'd occasionally write little blog posts, and if I even mildly critique Harlan, I got 3 times a lawyer representing Harlan Ellison contacted me saying, "You need to be careful about what you say about Harlan." Now, in hindsight, I'm pretty sure it was Harlan Ellison pretending to be his own lawyer, contacting me, trying to threaten me
Yeah.
and scare me into not mentioning anything negative about it. But I'm not going to change the fact that I liked his fiction.
Mhm.
I, in fact, earlier last year, I wrote a whole essay about all the wrong he did to authors with his, with Final Dangerous Visions, his final of the anthology that he never published.
Mhm.
But I can still say I love his fiction. Now, you were asking about an author I wish more people, and book I wish more people would read. Mama Day by Gloria Naylor. This is Naylor is tragically has passed. It's not traditionally seen as a genre writer. Mama Day is a beautiful fantasy, and it is so powerful. I mean, it's the first book I ever read that made me cry at the end. Um, literal tears. I don't mean just having a little sadness or something like that. Um, I wish more people read Mama Day by Gloria Naylor. Um, that was a very influential book when I guess I read it back in the 90s, I want to say, mid 90s. Um, just amazing and beautifully written, so that's one I wish more people would read. Um, but yeah, I'm kind of rambling, so
Nice.
stop
No,
me
no, no,
anytime.
that's fine. I was just the Harlan Ellison. I used to say, the only cure for an overdose of Harlan Ellison is a good shot of Spider Robinson,
Yeah.
who was kind of like the anti, you know.
Well, that is one thing. When people ask me if you want to make it as a writer, my suggestion is don't be a jerk. Don't be an asshole. Editors and publishers and eventually readers remember that. I mean, in my journalism for my genre Grapevine, I do write, I point out some flaws in what I see and stuff like that, but I try not to never personally attack anyone. I may say, hey, this person's doing A, B, C, and D, but I try not to do a personal attacks or anything like that.
Mhm.
Just try to be decent to people as when you're an author. Unfortunately though, our genre over the decades really rewarded people for being jerks as authors.
I
Um,
mean, the culture kind of rewarded people for being jerks too.
yeah, I
I
wish.
think it's easier to be revealed as a jerk now, which I think is part of the complaints of the people that complain about this idea of cancel culture and stuff. It's like, that person was able to get away with it. Why can't I? Well, it's because now we can see you.
No, that is true. I mean, although we were talking about Isaac Asimov and his harassing of women, and while they didn't have social media back then, people were writing about that in the fanzines and stuff like that. There was a famous episode where back in the 60s, by the way, I do enjoy genre history, so I know a good bit of it. At one of the World Cons, I think it was Earl Kemp was in charge of the World Con, and he proposed a panel where Isaac Asimov could talk about the pleasures of pinching women's butts. And they didn't end up doing the panel, but the fact that they could even consider and joke about stuff like that. So people knew it, but unfortunately there was a tolerance for that kind of stuff, which thankfully has changed.
Well, didn't he write the Memoirs of a Dirty Old Man or something like that?
That was indeed as one of Asimov's. He wrote a couple of autobiographies, but I think that was one of them. I haven't read it, so I'm not certain.
Yeah, I just remember hearing about it. Well, we are getting close to the end. I'm actually going to borrow something from our World Builders Weekly, and if it's okay with you, ask you my lightning round questions, which is some summary. Although I kind of want to ask also, why do you hate cats? Your background is I
meant to point that out. You know what? I use this because I don't hate cats. The background is the amazing art for one of my recent stories, Whistle Post of Forgotten Railroads, which features an amazing cat who does not get run over by a train, is actually, so that it's a little artistic license there, but it's set along a railroad with a woman and her cat, and the cat is amazing. The cat does not get hurt. The cat comes out at the end as a hero. So it was in Fireside Magazine. People can find it. It is online. I love the story, but the cat does not get hurt.
Okay, then I think actually we needed to know that because people were going to wonder. Yeah. Actually, I'll also say, just to bring it out from the chat that I had been neglecting because I was listening to you. One person brought up that Song of Solomon by Toni Morrison.
Oh yeah,
would also count as that.
And Beloved, I should admit, and Beloved is also
essential.
I mean, it's a ghost story, you know, but far beyond just a regular ghost story. It's amazing too.
Yeah, and there was a question about your accent was delighting people. So
thank you. Yeah, I was born and raised in Alabama in the American South. So
gotcha.
But then I served overseas in the Peace Corps, lived in Minnesota, so it's been kind of sliced and diced.
Yeah, same here. Born in Oklahoma, raised in New Jersey, live in the Midwest. I mean, what can you do? So the lightning round. What if I said, "Hey, Jason, this has been a great interview. I want to get you a beverage of your choice. Can be alcoholic, non-alcoholic. What would you like to have? What do you go to?"
Unsweet iced tea every day.
There's the Alabama coming out there. And what if I said, "Hey, let's go grab a bite to eat"? What would be your food of choice?
Bibimbap. You know, it's basically the version of Korean food with the rice and other stuff on it. I've been obsessing on it last year or two. Love it.
Huh. Okay. Hey, you and my partner Natasha would get along well with that. The next one is, well, actually, you've already recommended a lot of books, but let's say it has to be something really fast. I'm like, hey, I gotta take a flight. I have about 3 hours. What's a book I should download to my Kindle? I've already read Mama Day. Pretend that.
Yeah. Hold on, I'm gonna grab it. It's right here.
Okay.
Oh shoot, it's gonna
hold it in front of your chest. So we'll be able to see it.
If I Had Two Wings, Randall Keenan.
Okay.
Randall Keenan is a short story writer who tragically passed away. This was his last collection of stories. But there's also his first collection, which anything by Randall Keenan, short fiction, go read it.
Cool. And then I say, oh, wait, I don't like Amazon. I absolutely don't want to download anything to my Kindle. But you know what? I could always download something on like Netflix or one of the streaming services that's not Prime. What would you recommend I watch?
Oh, shoot. It's Test. Shoot. I got to look it up real quick. Hold on.
No worries. Yeah, absolutely.
I just watched Tresse. I couldn't remember how to. Trust
do
me, it is a new animated series on Netflix, came out just a few weeks ago, based on a Philippine webcomic. Horror,
huh.
fantasy. I really enjoyed it. It's only 6 episodes, but they are bringing it back for a second season.
Wow.
Trese.
Trese. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. What is something in that room with you that people would be surprised that you have? Or we can also phrase this as, what's something you have around you that doesn't have a deliberate use, but you have it there anyway?
Peanut.
That is a peanut.
This is a ceramic peanut. One of my coworkers gave it to me when she retired. What is ironic is this ceramic peanut was made of clay from the hometown I grew up in, and she just happened to have it. And so when she retired, she gave it to me.
Nice, nice. Yeah, you our Geek in the Van just noted that you are now in the top 3 of unexpected items that we've had for asking this.
Ceramic peanut, got it. Cool.
Okay, so the last question, I have a magic wand that looks a lot like a ukulele.
Okay.
And if I wave this wand, absolutely anyone from past, present, or future, alive, dead, I mean, if they're dead, they come back to life, imaginary or real, could appear and sit down and have a conversation with you. Who would you like to have manifest?
I'm digging, like I said, used to be an archaeologist.
Yeah.
I can't give a name, but I would love to be able to speak to some Homo erectus, Homo habilis, or some of the early humanity from like 500,000 or 1,000,000 years or more ago. And yes, we're pretty sure, and I'm this again, my opinion, but based on the evidence that yes, they had language, and they,
Nice.
so I would love to talk to some of the humans from 500,000 or 1,000,000 years ago to see how they saw the world that developed into who we are.
I'm picturing going, where did we go wrong? That kind of thing. That's a really great answer. I appreciate that. So we come to the end of our time. So we are going to surprise first of all, let everyone know in the chat, we're going to do a raid on Saucefire at the end of this. Saucefire is a great supporter. He's actually going to DM a World Builders Dungeons and Dragons game this weekend. But yeah, again, we'd like to have everybody check out our Geeks Doing Good fundraiser. We appreciate all of your support. Jason, we really appreciate your time and all the work you did, and hope to have you back, for other World Builders events.
Anytime, happy to. I love the work you're doing, and it's important for the genre.
Thanks.
And the world.
Thanks. And you can find Jason's stuff at I don't know how you managed it, but you got the best URL for your website ever, jasonsanford.com.
Absolutely.
Or his Patreon at patreon.com/Jason Sanford.
Yep,
and
there.
Thank you for all the recommendations and stuff. And our sign-off word before we go raid Saucefire will be, since I just read the mirror blink, it'll be Blinkamoose. And when they put that in the chat, we know that we're actually caught up with them and we're not just disappearing. Yes, that was it. Great.